The night Opal Mercer almost lost everything was the same night she finally stopped being afraid. She hadn't planned to be a waitress at 31. Nobody plans that, exactly. Especially not someone who'd spent 3 years on a pre-med scholarship at Georgetown, maintaining a 3.9 GPA before the phone call that changed everything. Her mother, Patricia, had been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's disease during Opal's junior year. The medical bills arrived like a flood. The scholarship couldn't cover what insurance wouldn't. And Opal, who had spent her whole childhood watching her mother work double shifts at a laundromat in Baltimore to give her daughter a shot at something better, made the only decision she could live with. She came home. That had been 8 years ago. Patricia was stable now, mostly, managed by a combination of medications that cost more per month than Opal made in 2 weeks. Opal had clawed her way into the fine dining world, not because she loved it, but because the tips at Elsin, a 2 Michelin-star restaurant nested in the heart of Chicago's Gold Coast, were the only income that kept the lights on and the prescriptions filled. She was good at it, too, precise, quiet, efficient, the kind of server who materialized at your elbow exactly when you needed her and evaporated when you didn't. Her manager, a compact, permanently irritated man named Bryce, had exactly one use for Opal's particular brand of watchful competence: keeping her out of sight. "You're a back server," he told her during her first week, 4 years ago. "Water glasses, bread baskets, clearing. Don't initiate conversation with the guests. You make them uncomfortable." What he meant, though he would never say it, was that Opal didn't look like the other servers. She was too quiet, too careful, too deliberate in a place where the staff were expected to perform a kind of effortless elegance, like well-dressed furniture that occasionally spoke. She had learned to make herself smaller than she actually was. It was a skill she had not wanted to acquire. On the night everything changed, Elsin was running at full capacity. A private event had taken over the mezzanine, a retirement celebration for someone in commercial real estate, and the main floor was packed with the particular breed of Chicago wealth that wore its money in the way older cities do, quietly, expensively, and without apology. The reservation that had every server on edge was table 7 in the glass alcove overlooking the river. A corner table, the best in the house, reserved weeks in advance under the name Aldred. Franklin Aldred was not a man who needed an introduction in this city. At 68, he was the founder and recently retired chairman of Aldred Capital Group, a private equity firm with enough assets under management to make certain senators return his phone calls within the hour. He had stepped back from the day-to-day running of the firm 6 months ago, handing the reins to his son, and the financial press had spent those 6 months speculating about what that transition meant for the firm's direction, its culture, and its considerable fortune. Franklin himself had said nothing publicly. He was a man who had always preferred action to announcement. Tonight, he had come to dinner with his family. Opal watched them arrive from her station near the service corridor. Franklin moved slowly but deliberately, the careful gait of a man who had recently recovered from something and was not yet willing to admit the recovery was incomplete. Beside him walked his son, Reeve Aldred, 38, sharp-featured, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Opal's monthly rent. Reeve had the practiced ease of someone accustomed to being watched, one hand resting lightly on his father's elbow in a gesture that looked like support but carried, Opal noticed, the faint tension of a leash. The third member of the party was a woman Opal didn't recognize. She was introduced in the press later as Sylvana Lorre, Reeve's girlfriend of 14 months, a former corporate attorney who had left her firm to, according to her social media, pursue a more intentional life. She was striking in the way that required significant maintenance, perfect blowout, minimalist jewelry, the kind of posture that came from Pilates 4 times a week. She guided Franklin to his chair with her hand on his back, a gesture that read as warmth from a distance. Opal was close enough to see the pressure in her fingertips. The 4th member of the party arrived 3 minutes after the others, slightly breathless, unwinding a scarf as she came through the door. This was Nola, Franklin's daughter. 35, 2 years younger than Reeve, with her father's eyes and her mother's stubborn jaw. She'd flown in from Seattle that morning. Opal would learn this later, from the conversation she was not supposed to hear. And she looked like someone who had been traveling since before dawn and had come directly from the airport to the restaurant without stopping to change. Her blazer was slightly wrinkled. There was a crease on her cheek from sleeping on the plane. Franklin's face, which had been carefully composed until that moment, broke into something genuine when he saw her. Nola leaned down and hugged her father for a long time. Not the brief, perfunctory embrace of obligation, but the kind of hug that said, "I was worried about you, and I'm sorry I live so far away, and I'm here now," all at once. Franklin patted her back with his free hand, and Opal watched his shoulders drop about an inch, as if a tension he'd been holding for weeks had just been permitted to release. Then Silvana said, brightly, "Nola, you made it. We were starting to wonder." And the warmth in the corner vanished like steam. The dinner unfolded the way these things do, with the careful choreography of people who are not quite comfortable with each other, pretending to be. Reeve ordered for the table without consulting his father, rattling off selections with the fluency of someone who had eaten here many times before. Silvana laughed at things that weren't quite jokes, her hand resting frequently on Reeve's forearm in a way that managed to include him and exclude everyone else simultaneously. Nola asked her father questions. "How are you sleeping? Are you still working with Dr. Vasic? What does your PT say?" And Reeve answered most of them before Franklin could open his mouth. Opal circulated with the water pitcher. She filled glasses, cleared the amuse-bouche plates, faded in and out of the alcove with the invisibility Bryce had trained into her. But she was watching. She had always been a watcher. It had started with her mother, learning to read Patricia's tremors, to anticipate the bad days before they arrived, to interpret the small involuntary signals that preceded a fall or a freeze. That particular education had given Opal a quality of attention that most people would never develop, a way of observing that was more like listening. What she was listening to at table 7 was the silence around Franklin Aldred. He was present at his own dinner the way a portrait is present at a party, there to be seen, occasionally addressed, but not actually included in the conversation. When he spoke, Reeve would nod with the expression of someone waiting for a pause, then redirect. When he reached for his water glass, his hand trembled slightly, and Silvana immediately reached across him to refill it, a gesture that appeared helpful and functioned as a reminder. When Nola asked him directly about his health, Reeve said, "Dad's doing great. We've got everything handled on that front," and Franklin's jaw tightened in the barely perceptible way of a man who has been managed once too often. Nola saw it too. Opal could tell from the way Nola's eyes cut to her father and then away, filing something. The moment that changed everything happened during the main course. Reeve had stepped away to take a phone call. "IPO timing. I'll be 2 minutes, you know how it is." And Silvana had excused herself to the restroom, leaving Franklin and Nola alone for the first time all evening. Opal was at the service station just outside the alcove, technically out of view, replenishing the bread basket. The alcove had a particular acoustic quality, something to do with the curve of the glass wall that carried certain frequencies of voice with unusual clarity. Nola. Franklin's voice was quiet and very level. I need you to understand something. Dad, let me finish. A pause. I did not consent to the Dudmere filing. I want you to know that. A longer pause. Opal kept her hands on the breadbasket. She was not moving. She was not breathing. The Dunmere filing, Nola said carefully. Dad, that was filed 3 weeks ago. Reeve said you reviewed. I know what Reeve said. Franklin's voice didn't rise. It went the other direction, flatter, more deliberate. I did not review it. I was shown 1 page. I was told it was a routine compliance document. I signed it in the car on the way to my cardiologist appointment because Reeve said it had a same-day deadline. He stopped. I am 68 years old, and I have run this firm for 40 years. I know what I signed, Nola, and I know what I did not. There was a sound that might have been Nola setting down her fork. What is the Dunmere filing? She asked. It is a transfer of my remaining 15% voting interest in Aldred Capital to a blind trust, Franklin said, of which Silvana Lorre is the named administrator. Opal's hand closed around the breadbasket so hard her knuckles went white. A blind trust, Nola repeated, effective immediately upon my signature, which I apparently provided. Franklin's voice was precise and completely without emotion, the way a person sounds when they are maintaining control by sheer force of will. I have been trying to reach my personal attorney for 10 days. My calls are being returned by Reeve's assistant, who tells me Conrad is traveling. I asked Silvana to help me contact him directly, and she offered to draft a letter on my behalf. He let that sentence sit in the air for a moment. I did not accept her offer. Dad. Nola's voice had gone very quiet. Dad, are you telling me? I am telling you. Franklin said that I am not confused. I am not declining. I know what is happening in my own company, and I know what has been done without my understanding. I am telling you because you are the only person at this table who is going to believe me. The sound of heels on the hardwood, Silvana returning. Franklin stopped speaking. When Opal glanced into the alcove a moment later, he was examining his Dover sole with the careful attention of a man who had been talking about nothing in particular. Silvana slid back into her seat, her smile intact, her eyes moving between father and daughter with the practiced assessment of someone checking the weather. Reeve returned 30 seconds later, still on his phone, gesturing an apology that was mostly for Silvana's benefit. Opal set the breadbasket down on the service cart and stood very still. She was a 31-year-old back server with a water pitcher and no leverage whatsoever. She was 3 months behind on one of her mother's medication co-pays. She had been told explicitly by her manager, twice, not to involve herself with the guests beyond her assigned function. She had been in this industry long enough to know that interfering with a table of this caliber over something she had heard while standing in a service corridor was the kind of thing that didn't just end a job. It ended a career. She also knew, with a certainty that sat in her stomach like a stone, that she was watching a man be dismantled by the people who were supposed to love him, and that by tomorrow, based on what Franklin had just described, the legal mechanism for finishing that process would be entirely in place. She had watched her mother lose things she didn't consent to lose. Opal knew what it looked like when someone's autonomy was being taken away in small, plausible increments, each one individually defensible, collectively devastating. She recognized the look on Franklin Aldred's face because she had seen it on Patricia's face a dozen times. The look of a person who is perfectly lucid and completely unable to make anyone believe it. She picked up the water pitcher and walked back into the alcove. She refilled Silvana's glass first, then Reeve's. Then she moved to Franklin's side of the table, and as she poured, she bent slightly and said, very quietly, looking at the table and not at him, Mr. Aldred, I'm sorry to intrude. If you need to reach your attorney directly, not through anyone's assistant. The Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission has a public directory. You can access it from any phone browser without going through your contacts. I'm sorry. Enjoy your dinner. She straightened up and began to move away. Wait. Franklin's voice was low, but absolute. Opal stopped. The table had gone completely still. Reeve was staring at her with the expression of a man trying to decide whether to be confused or furious. Silvana's smile had not moved, but something behind her eyes had shifted, a rapid, almost imperceptible recalculation. Nola was looking at Opal with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What did you say?" Reeve asked, his voice carrying the particular edge of someone accustomed to rooms that comply. "I asked the young lady a question," Franklin said, without looking at his son. "She'll answer me." He looked at Opal steadily. "You work here?" "Yes, sir." "You overheard what I said. It was not quite a question." Opal held his gaze. "I wasn't trying to, sir. I was at the service station. The acoustics in this room. I should have moved away. I'm sorry." "But you didn't." "No, sir." Franklin studied her for a long moment. He had the eyes of someone who had spent 4 decades reading people across a negotiating table, and Opal felt the quality of his attention like a physical thing. "Why not?" he asked. Opal was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Because my mother has Parkinson's," she said. "And 3 years ago, someone convinced her to sign a document she didn't fully understand, reassigning power of attorney during a high symptom week, and it took us 8 months and a legal aid attorney to untangle it. And she's one of the lucky ones, because we caught it." She paused. "I recognized what you were describing, Mr. Aldred. I'm sorry, I know this isn't my place." The alcove was so quiet that Opal could hear the river traffic outside through the glass. Then Bryce materialized in the entrance to the alcove, his face the color of old chalk. He had seen the pause in service. He had come to investigate. "Is there a problem here?" he said, in the careful tone of a man who is prepared to sacrifice whatever needs to be sacrificed. "Miss Mercer, I apologize, Mr. Aldred. She is a back server. She should not be." "She's fine," Franklin said, without inflection. Bryce stopped. "Actually," Franklin continued, and now he turned to look at his son across the table, and the quality of his voice changed in a way that Opal suspected had made a great many people very uncomfortable over a great many years. "Reeve, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me in front of your sister and in front of this young woman, because I think we've had enough private conversations this week." He folded his hands on the table. "Who is the named administrator of the Dunmere Blind Trust?" Reeve's jaw tightened. "Dad, this is not the time or place. That's an interesting answer to a yes or no question. It's a complex." "The administrator," Franklin repeated. A long pause. "It's a temporary arrangement," Reeve said finally. "Silvana has a fiduciary background. It made practical sense during the transition." "I see." Franklin picked up his water glass and set it down again with the precise deliberateness of someone who has decided something irrevocable. "Nola." Nola looked at her father. "Call David Osei right now. Not tomorrow. He was your mother's estate attorney, and he has never once returned a call to Reeve's office, which is why his number still works." Franklin's voice was calm and absolutely final. "Tell him I need 30 minutes tonight. Tell him why." Nola was already reaching for her phone. Silvana stood up. Her voice, when she spoke, had lost the warmth it had been wearing all evening, revealing something considerably colder underneath. "Franklin, I understand you're feeling overwhelmed, and I know this transition has been difficult, but making accusations at dinner based on something a waitress overheard is not." "I'm not making accusations," Franklin said, looking at her with the measured calm of a man who has stopped needing to raise his voice to be frightening. I'm asking my son a question about my own company, and I'm asking my daughter to make a phone call. That's all." He paused. "But I will note that you chose the word accusations." Silvana sat back down. Reeve turned to Opal. His voice had the particular quality of someone who has decided to try one more thing before the situation fully escapes him. "What exactly did you hear?" he said. "Because I'd be very careful, if I were you, about repeating fragments of a private conversation that you clearly misunderstood." Opal looked at him. She thought of her mother's face when she'd realized what had been signed. She thought of the legal aid attorney who had worked their case for free and sent Patricia a card at Christmas every year since. She thought of the 8 months of waking up at 3 in the morning with the particular dread of a problem that doesn't stop existing when you stop thinking about it. "I heard enough," she said. Reeve's expression went very still. "I think," Nola said, from across the table, her phone already at her ear, "that you should sit down, Reeve." He didn't, but he didn't say anything else either. Bryce was still standing in the entrance to the alcove, having the experience of a man watching a flood and being unable to locate higher ground. He looked at Opal with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not the habitual disapproval, not the preemptive irritation, but something that was almost helpless. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. David Osei answered on the second ring. Nola stepped away from the table, moving toward the glass wall and the river lights beyond it, and spoke in a low, rapid voice for several minutes. Opal stayed where she was, because nobody had told her to leave, and she was not going to give ground. She refilled the remaining water glasses. She kept her hands steady. When Nola came back to the table, she looked at her father and said, "He's available. He wants to know if you can come now." Franklin looked down at his half-eaten Dover sole. Then he looked at Opal. "The food is excellent," he said, with the small, deliberate courtesy of a man who has not forgotten his manners in the middle of a crisis. "Please tell the kitchen." "I will, sir." He pushed back his chair. He was steady, Opal noticed, steadier than he'd been when he arrived, some internal counterweight restored. Nola came around the table and took his arm, not with the managing pressure Reeve had used, but with the easy naturalness of someone who had done it 1,000 times and meant nothing by it except, "I'm here." Franklin paused at the edge of the alcove and looked back at Opal one more time. "You said your mother went through something similar," he said. "Yes, sir. Is she all right now?" Opal thought of Patricia in her chair by the window on Sunday mornings, working the crossword with a pencil, maddening Opal by refusing to use a pen. "She's all right," Opal said. He nodded, as if this were the one piece of information he'd needed all evening. Then he left with Nola beside him, and did not look back at Reeve or Silvana. What happened after that unfolded over weeks, not that night. Opal read pieces of it in the business press, filling in the rest from context. Reeve Aldred's authority at the firm placed in a 60-day operational review. The Dunmere filing challenged in Cook County Court by Franklin's attorney, with a motion for emergency review granted within 72 hours. Silvana Law quietly removed as trustee during the pendency of the proceedings. A forensic accountant hired to review 18 months of documentation. Opal wasn't part of any of that. She went back to work the next morning, filled water glasses, cleared bread plates, avoided Bryce, who had not spoken to her since the night of Table 7, and showed no signs of doing so imminently. She didn't expect anything to come of it for herself, and she didn't need anything to come of it. That was not why she had done it. 10 days after the dinner, a letter arrived at Elsin addressed to her by name. Inside was a handwritten note on personal stationery, not company letterhead, in a script that was formal and slightly uneven, the hand of someone relearning steadiness. It said, My daughter told me you mentioned that you'd had to leave school. I have a conversation I'd like to have with you, if you're willing. Not about a job, about a different kind of possibility. Call my office and ask for Nola. She's expecting you." Opal read it 3 times standing at the service station. Then she folded it and put it in the pocket of her apron, next to a pen and a folded guest check, and finished her shift. She called the next morning. Her mother was having a good day, sitting by the window with her crossword, and Opal told her about it while the coffee was brewing. The dinner, the conversation, the letter, all of it. The way she had always told Patricia things, not to ask permission, but because she found things clearer when she said them aloud to someone who listened properly. Patricia was quiet for a moment after Opal finished. Then she said, in the careful cadence she used now, that was slower than before but no less certain, "You did the right thing." "I know," Opal said. "You were scared, terrified." Patricia turned back to her crossword. "That's the only kind of brave there is." Opal poured 2 cups of coffee and brought one to her mother and sat down beside her in the second chair by the window, and for a while they were quiet together in the morning light, and Opal thought about what it meant to finally stop making herself small in a room, and how strange it was that the moment she'd stopped, the room had simply gotten bigger to fit her.